Today I'm joined by someone who spent years as a CIA case officer, working overseas, then brought that experience into Hollywood, consulting for major studios and helping shape how the intelligence world is shown on the screen. He teaches, he advises, and he writes for Field Ethos, where his stories focus on humility, family, and the hard-earned lessons that only come from experience. He has a passion for emotional intelligence and leadership development. Welcome to the Silvercore podcast, Doug Patteson.
Thanks, Travis. Glad to be here. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to chat with you again.
Yeah, I mean, we got some time to chat on our last hunting trip over there in Alberta. We're looking for some elk, and I was kind of hobbling around up the hills, and now I've had the luxury of surgery, so I've got my leg up, and I might adjust a few times through, and hopefully the pain meds, which I tried to go off yesterday, took one last night, don't impair my thinking too much more than is normal.
Well, your hunting season's not over yet, so I'm surprised you didn't wait till a little bit longer to get through that for the knee.
Yeah, well, I've got a few trips planned. So it's supposed to be a SHOT Show in Vegas in January, and I need 6 weeks before I can bend at 90 degrees. And getting on a plane, 6'6", it's going to be at 90 degrees, and might have something happening in March as well. So I figured, well, we had a pretty good hunting season. How about you? How was your season?
It was okay. I got out and got to do some bird hunting, which is really my favorite. You know, I really enjoy having venison in the freezer, but I love bird hunting kind of above all else because of the action and the movement, and particularly when you're working over good dogs. So I got in some pheasant hunting, I got in some duck hunting, and I took a pretty decent doe this year that helped fill the freezer. So
nice,
not bad.
Do you have your own bird dogs, or are you hunting over others?
No, I have a chocolate lab that does pretty well in upland game. I haven't done her on ducks much. I hunt with my buddy over his Chesapeake Bay Retriever for ducks.
Okay. Yeah, those chocolate labs are supposed to be phenomenal over ducks.
Yes. Yeah, we just haven't had a chance to get out there, and I'm always reticent to take my dog with another guy's dog if she doesn't have good training in the field, and I just haven't spent enough time in a duck blind with her on my own. So, she sits at home and gets to chase ducks that I throw in the yard for her when I get back.
Nice. Well, I wouldn't consider myself the most accomplished duck man, but we've got duck hunting 10 minutes from my house, which is kind of unusual for the Lower Mainland here. You usually got to drive far out if you want to do any hunting. We've got some beautiful properties we have access to. So when you're in Vancouver next during hunting season, you let me know and we'll make it happen.
That sounds great. I'd love to do that.
Our elk hunt was fun. That was interesting. I showed up a little late, so I was in Sweden, got off the plane, and immediately got on another plane to fly into Alberta, absolutely jet lagged, and expecting to stay in a luxurious tent. And what happened there?
Well, it's interesting. A whole bunch of things went wrong, but it didn't matter because we had the right team of guys together that recovered from it and continued to go on and have a great hunt. And so there was some good lessons learned there, but what happened was the wind, which Alberta is kind of notorious for, won. It beat us out of our tents that first night. We got in there a little bit later than we wanted to be, but it was fine. Set up tents, kind of in the waning light of the day. Tried to use the truck as a wind block for where we'd set it up, but I guess there were 35 to 50 mile per hour winds blowing all night long against a tent that really wasn't designed as an alpine mountaineering high wind environment tent. And so over the night, that tent fought valiantly, but ultimately the wind fly poles snapped and every metal fitting on the regular poles bent. And by 2:30 in the morning, we were getting beat in the face by the top of the tent, and decided to E&E out of there to a local motel. The net effect of that, though, was it got us off to a really late start on opening morning of the elk hunt. And by the time we got into the field, it was probably almost 10 a.m. Because we had needed to catch some sleep just from a safety perspective. And there were definitely evidence of others who had beat us into the field that morning and taken their elk. But overall, it was a beautiful week in the woods. We saw elk, just didn't see anything we could shoot. We saw way more muleys than I ever would have thought possible
Mm-hmm.
in that area, as well as whitetail and lots of other wildlife. So it was a great hunt.
Yeah. So were you lying in bed trying to make the decision, like, can we sleep through this, or should we get up and deal with it?
Yeah, I had actually finally fallen asleep, and Chance woke up and said, "Yeah, no, we're done. I'm calling it right now." I'd have probably stayed
Mm,
through the night because I felt like it was gonna. I wasn't gonna get wet. I was gonna stay dry,
mm,
and there wasn't an opening in the tent. It didn't tear open, so it
mm.
just was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, shrinking down. And at some point in time, I think we would have been fine staying in there. But Chance made the call, and we DD'd out of there.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, by the time I got there, we had the luxury of being in the basement of the farmhouse and
Right.
nice and warm, and so that was rather luxurious. It was some interesting hunting. I haven't hunted elk like that before. It was a good learning experience, and it was some great company. I really enjoyed that hunt.
It was great company. It's a beautiful area.
Mm,
I think I don't, my first elk hunt, right? So I had
mm,
not had that experience, the same experience that you'd had. There's it's a lot of publicly accessible land with some private patches interspersed in between it. So you just don't know who else you're going to run into out there. And we ran into quite a few hunters that had taken the almost 2 mile walk in from the road.
mm-hmm.
And I was pretty impressed actually with a lot of those hunters and how hard they were willing to work. Sometimes here on the East Coast, if you have a spot you're trying to get to and it's more than 200 yards off the road, most people won't go much further in than that.
So
So
true.
a number of these hunters worked really hard to get into to where they were.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was really kind of cool to see. But it did mean that there were a lot of other hunters in the woods around where we were.
Yeah, I got an elk in BC this year, and we're in an area far up north and figured that the pressure would be less, and, ended up taking an elk in this one area, very promising, figured we'd come back and get another elk out of there because it clearly held them. And Buddy, who's a better caller than I am, he's calling. We can hear it coming in, playing it back and forth for about an hour. And in pops these two other hunters, and good on them. They hiked all the way in from the other end, and they thought they were playing us. We could hear the one in the distance. It ended up hightailing it, but we ended up in that same scenario about 3 more times on that hunt. And I was like, how far do you really have to go to be in a remote area? Like
Right.
Alaska? Do we have to go to Alaska and hunt out there? Maybe that's
Right.
next on our docket.
Caribou.
Yeah.
That'd
Yeah.
be neat. One thing that surprised me was how few people wore blaze orange
Mm.
in the woods.
And
That
no one.
I saw one guy with one panel of blaze orange on his backpack that he wore while hiking in, but
Mm.
otherwise nobody had blaze on, and it really surprised me.
Yeah, in British Columbia and Alberta, I don't know about the other provinces, but it's not a requirement.
Hmm.
For hunting pheasant, there's going to be requirements. I wear blaze orange in certain areas, but I think so. I just came from Sweden, and everyone's wearing orange. And
Yeah,
I mean, I we've looked at the pictures. They were highly successful hunts. It's not like wearing orange makes you less
right.
of a hunter. I think the theory is that if the other hunters can't see you, they won't shoot at you, is what I've heard people say. I don't know. I personally, I think having blaze orange is probably not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think even if it's just a toque, that's blaze orange, you
Mm-hmm.
know, something that's going to catch an eye, before they bring the scope up to their shoulder, rifle to their shoulder and scope to their eye.
100%. So, okay, let's chat about the CIA because I'm really curious about that. We didn't talk much about this. We had a couple interesting stories, which I will not repeat here, but we, what was the road like that got you into the CIA, and then what did your career in the CIA look like?
Yeah, so I went in the late '80s, right? I was in undergrad trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Didn't really have a good sense or idea of the things I wanted to do, but I knew I had a desire to serve in some capacity. My grandfather had been a fighter pilot in World War II. My other grandfather had been a naval intelligence officer in World War II. I had something in there that was drawing me towards that, but I didn't know whether I was going to go in the military or some other way. And I kind of looked at both paths in my senior year of college, and ultimately found myself in an interview that I've talked about elsewhere in time that was a somewhat hostile interview from the CIA, where the interviewer was not very impressed with me or my background, and largely because he was looking for a different type of person than the role I was trying to get as a case officer. But fortunately, he saw something in me that put me through the process, even though he told me he didn't think personally I would make it through. And I went through a kind of a 9-month interview process with lots of psychological exams and physical exams and tests and so on and so forth, before ultimately getting hired on as a clandestine, meaning undercover case officer, whose role was to go out overseas and recruit and run intelligence assets against a wide range of targets: counterterrorism, Russia, China, all of those things.
So why do you think he didn't think you would make it? What was it in you that wasn't impressing him? And do you think maybe he was just trying to push you a little bit to say, I'll prove you wrong?
No, it's a great question. So he had come from the analyst side of the house at the agency, and there's a really strong competition between the analyst side and the collection side, which is where the case officers sit, operations side, about who are the more important arm of the agency. Right? Analysts process the intelligence that's collected and then ultimately take it to the policymakers, including the president. The collection folks on the operations side, they go out and steal the secrets. They recruit the spies and run them. So the analysts are more akin to academics and tend to look down at the collection and operations practitioners in the field as being lesser folks, kind of knuckle draggers. And of course, the collections folks tend to look down at the analyst side, going, "Well, you guys don't know how the real world operates, and you guys are just a bunch of nerds, doing it." So they, both look at each other, and in reality, both are absolutely necessary to accomplish the mission of the agency. So he came from that analyst background and was really looking for analysts and scientists and engineers. And I showed up with a resume and a transcript that had a 2.98 GPA on a 4.0 scale, and told him, when he asked me about it, that my focus had been on beer and girls and not necessarily in that order. And so, there's probably something in the flippancy with which I answered some of his questions, maybe the cockiness that I carried around that time of my life as well, came across to him as something he didn't connect with, but it also made him recognize that perhaps there was a connection to the operations field, which obviously it turned out there was.
Having had the opportunity to chat with people from a diverse background and different special forces operations and intelligence areas, it's the people who can think outside the box, who have this sort of irreverent nature to them that I find seem to really thrive well in those operational environments, because they're not stuck when something happens. There's always a different out. There's always their minds thinking differently than how most people would think. And that probably served you quite well.
Yeah, I think it did. And it really was a different mindset than what he was specifically, looking for in the more academic side of the house. And that was fine, right? I wouldn't want it to be anywhere that wasn't the right fit for my nature and my skill sets.
So since you went through the application process, but now you've got to go through a more covert process, from what I understand, I did a little bit of research, they binned you on paper anyways. And then you got your official, you're not approved, but you got another process to go through. I think you mentioned that on the Jack Carr podcast.
That's right. Yeah. The interview process that I'd started with had been an overt process, meaning, it was CIA on campus, and, people signed up for interview slots. And so the role that I was going to be pursuing was not in that overt space. It was a covert role. And so they had to kind of close that loop in order to allow that other process to happen. And so that all got taken care of, and I jumped into that covert process, which meant that I was interviewing for a different kind of government role that I could tell people I was interviewing for. They just didn't know, what it actually was.
So that's kind of interesting. So you had to basically live with this secret over your head the entire time you're with the agency, did you?
That's right. Yeah, I had a specific role that I could tell people that I did, right, and I legitimately did that work also. But it, very few people were kind of read in onto what I was actually doing. In fact, only my parents and my wife's parents were read in on that. Nobody, my siblings didn't know, my wife's siblings didn't know, etc.
How does that affect your relationships with your friends and your family, having these sort of secrets that you're holding?
It can be challenging. I think actually one of the reasons we ultimately decided to leave, my wife ended up joining CIA as well, was that we got tired of lying. We recognized the reasons and we understood the justification behind it. Didn't actually have a problem with that, but I do tend to believe that lying, even when well justified, will change you over time. Right? It causes little cracks in your foundation, your moral foundation, that I think are difficult to shore up constantly before they just create, bigger issues elsewhere in your life. And, to those that have been able to do it for an entire career, I really, admire what their ability to do that without undermining who they are. For us, eventually, we just decided, among a bunch of other factors, that we just were tired of having to lie all of the time about what we did and where we worked.
Did you grow up in an environment of secrecy, or was that new to you when you got on with the agency?
Yeah, no, it absolutely was new to me. I had no real experience with that other than, lying to my parents about where I was going. Like the traditional aspects of kind of teenage and young adulthood secrecy, where you keep things, to yourself, maybe, as a self-preservation mechanism. But no, I had no experience with, secrecy at a corporate level.
What do you think would surprise somebody the most who's not used to that? What would surprise the young you the most after having been indoctrinated into it?
I think what surprised me, it was, it's a very specific example. You regularly go through security investigations that include polygraphs and things like that, and one of the things they regularly interview you about is lifestyle choices you make. And I remember, one of the interviewers saying, "Look, we don't care if you cheat on your spouse. We just really care if you lie to us about it." And so for me, what surprised me was that would be okay. That it would be okay for somebody to make that what I viewed as a significantly negative moral choice. And that would be okay as long as you just didn't lie to them about it. And I realized at the very basic level, they care about it because if you lie to them, lies can be used to manipulate you, as a motivation.
Sure.
Because people tend to be self-preservation oriented. So if somebody finds out you're having an affair and you're lying to the government about it, then they can use that, as a coercive tool against you. And but that power is taken away if you've told the government about it, right? But in my mind, that the real moral question there was what would make it okay for you to cheat on your spouse? Anyway, that's supposed to be your most trusted relationship
100%.
that you have. And so in my mind, they should be more worried about that than even just the lying about it, because if you're willing to do that, what else are you also willing to do? Where are your lines drawn and what are your basis for it? And so that really surprised me that I got it at the human level, but also it just was a little bit disappointing as I thought about it.
Yeah, I can see that.
I don't want to tar everybody that's there with that kind of making bad moral choices brush. And I haven't ever walked in their shoes, so I don't know what has led folks that have done that to make their decisions on it. But it to me, it was the corporate approach to almost sanctioning that as long as you just tell us about it, it's fine. And there are plenty of opportunities overseas when you're working as an operations officer or a case officer to engage in bad decision behaviors. Long hours where you can't tell your spouse what's going on, and lots of money and lots of seedy places, and so it almost felt like an endorsement of that lifestyle, as long as you maintained appropriate production and you didn't lie to them about the extracurriculars.
I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here, but it's probably a tool that you've used when generating assets. Would that be? So I wonder if that just becomes commonplace, and they look at it and they say, well, I mean, if Doug's going to go and do these things, I mean, we've got that extra little layer of control and security now. It's just a weird little secret of world of secrets.
Yeah. So, a wilderness of mirrors, as James Jesus Angleton called it. But yeah, so that was one of the reasons, and it just eventually wore enough at us. Combined with, it's a hard life on families. Most marriages don't survive it. I think about 2% of the marriages from my class of officers that entered actually survived a career there. So it's pretty brutal on that front anyway. And we just decided we wanted to stay married to each other rather than, commit to that career.
Did you meet your wife in the agency, or did she become part of the agency after meeting you?
She became part of the agency after she met me. We met outside. And in fact, I mean, our relationship started off with a lie, right? Because this was a girl I met in the bar. I couldn't actually tell her what I did until I, reached a decision point going, oh, well, this is more serious than just a girl in a bar. This could be somebody I'd spend the rest of my life with. And so I had to roll that back with her, which was one of my first real experiences with thinking through, okay, what is the consequences of a significant lie like this with people you care about? It was an unpleasant evening, to say the least, when I did that. But the relationship survived that. We married and moved overseas, and while we were overseas, she joined as well. And turned out she had a pretty good knack for the business as well.
Is that common? I mean, there's another guy going around, Bustamante or whatever his name is, and his wife was in the agency as well. Is that common to have spouses just try and keep the secrets in-house?
I don't know that it's trying to keep the secrets in-house, but the government, it is sometimes budget conscious, and so when you have tandem spouses, you get a 2-for-1 on relocation costs and things like that.
Sure.
It does make the security process easier, right? The background investigations are easier as well because a lot of that work's already done. So it's fairly common. And at some level, they're happy when people date inside or marry inside, because you've already got people that are accustomed to maintaining secrecy, maintaining need to know basis, et cetera, et cetera. So it does quite often make it easy.
So if you're out there recruiting assets, what would that look like?
You're responding to targets. Requests for information, intelligence priorities from Washington. And so you're looking for people who have information that would allow us to respond to those intelligence priorities. And, the goal is to basically meet those people and develop a relationship with them and ultimately convince them to provide secrets to you that you can then pass on in response to those intelligence priorities. And there's a whole bunch of ways that may take place. But it's not dissimilar from, a dating relationship in the sense of you're building close personal ties. Often you're understanding their motivations, their emotions, what drives them, before you ultimately make a pitch and get them into some form of a relationship doing it. And there's lots of variants of this, lots of, flavors like an ice cream shop of how it may play out. But ultimately the goal is to gain access to classified information or secret information in either foreign governments or non-state actors, right? Think terrorist groups, et cetera, criminal groups, in order to provide that information back to Washington, in response to intelligence priorities.
So I mean, you're asking somebody to do something which could cost them their life. It could cost
Yes.
them their livelihood. It could cost them their relationships. Like there's a high cost value associated with what you're asking these people to do. Did you find that it was that oftentimes you wouldn't be successful in your approach, or by the time that you started making the pitch, you're pretty sure you're on the right track with somebody?
I'd say generally for most officers, by the time you get to the pitch stage, you already know what the answer is going to be, or you've totally misread a situation and you made some mistakes. But generally, it's like asking somebody out, or asking the woman you've been dating to marry. You're probably pretty sure what her answer is going to be before you buy a ring and get
Sure.
down on your knee. Not
Hopefully.
always, right?
Hopefully.
But hopefully you've got that figured out. Similarly, you probably know what the answer is going to be, and in many cases, the actual pitch is really just the formality of making it a real relationship. But sometimes it fails. Sometimes they don't want it to be formal. They're happy with it to be informal. It really just depends on the situation, and what your goals are and who they are and what their motivations are.
So would you say it's more of an art form or more of a science that when you're reading these people and you're looking for the cues and seeing if they're being deceptive or truthful, how much would you put on art? How much would you contribute to science?
That's a great question. I'm not a psychologist, so I think a lot of psychologists would lump it largely into the science realm. And because it's people and everything about it is people, my gut would be to lump it into the art form. But I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. If you have a good understanding of psychology and the science behind people's decision making, you're probably going to be better, situated for that sort of work than somebody who just goes on, their gut and
Sure.
just thinks of it as an art form. And so I think one of the keys to success in this space as a case officer is to be a learner and really to kind of dig into the whys. And, so you ultimately spend the bulk of your career, I think, blending the science and the art in order to be successful.
Gotcha. I should imagine there's a fair bit of training that you received in order to be able to do this.
Yep.
Are there things that you use today in your everyday life that you learned with the agency?
It's interesting. I mean, 100% there are. I don't know that I could put words to them in the way that they were taught to me then, because I think I fundamentally really didn't have the maturity when I went in to grasp all that was being taught to me. It took years of marinating on it for some of it to kind of bubble up and go, oh yeah, that's useful, or that this works. And I think I was in those early years a very self-centered person, meaning that if I wanted to recruit an asset because I wanted to get promoted and I wanted to get a feather in my cap and I wanted to, blah, 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 blah. And in reality, some of the other officers who I would argue were more successful than me started out with a little more maturity and being significantly more others focused. And I think, because I think at the end of the day, when you're self-centered and overly focused on yourself, people see that. They read that. They may not know what it is, but it can build a wall, not break down a wall. Whereas when you're others focused, it builds walls. So you're taught, for example, how to understand people's motivations and what drives them, and then to provide solutions to the things that are their problems. And so that's a very useful skill set, but you can apply it for self-centered purposes or you can apply it for other-centered purposes. And so I think, in my case, my early years, I was trying to solve their problems so I could recruit them to get promotion, rather than trying to solve their problem because their problem needed to be solved. And then as a result of this strength of this relationship, the intelligence collection would be better, so on and so forth. And so I think those, it's semantic difference, right? Splitting a very fine line, but it's kind of like the line between cockiness and confidence, right? We all know it's hard to define it, but we know we like confident people more than we like cocky people.
Mm-hmm.
And the cockiness is often rooted in lack of self-confidence, and confidence is rooted in confidence.
Mm-hmm.
But they're very closely related concepts. And so I think you could use some of these tools for self purposes and use them okay, but really when you began to use them the way they were intended to be used, which is to accomplish something bigger and something greater, then they're more successful. And so those sorts of concepts are things that I've really kept with me. Thinking about emotional intelligence, thinking about being other-centered. It's kind of inculcated all of my leadership development, both of self, but then of the other people I lead, even in my current roles.
People talk about emotional intelligence a fair bit. What does it mean to you to be emotionally intelligent?
To me, it means radical self-awareness with transparency towards others, leading to accountability.
Mm.
So I have to know myself well enough. I have to give enough visibility to you and then invite you in to hold me accountable so that the end goal is I'm better.
Mm.
Right? That I grow and improve in soft skills, hard skills, whatever the focus may be, because it may be different with you than with somebody else I brought in to the circle, right? One may be very hard skills oriented, one may be very soft skills, leadership oriented. But to me, it's radical self-awareness. Like, you know yourself really well. You're willing to open yourself up to others and allow them to hold you accountable because you trust them to help you be better.
So that opens up a whole box of other things. Like
Sure.
the old adage, you don't know what you don't know. Like, how do you know your blind spots in the areas where you need improvement on if you're completely blind to it to begin with? And how do you build that trust with others, or find others that you can share that level of trust with, particularly if you're working in an environment where everyone's encouraged to misrepresent the truth, if I'm going to use a lawyer euphemism here.
Sure. Well, I don't think I was very emotionally intelligent inside. I don't think many of us were, certainly in the early stages of our careers. I think that grows with maturity and making mistakes, right? And at the end of the day, I think failure is a much greater teacher than success. And, I think about even watching my kids as they grow up, in athletics. They were always kids who were naturally better gifted than them. And my kids had to work harder. They ended up learning more because they failed a lot more than some of the kids that were just naturally gifted at some of these sports, who really also didn't know what it was like to work hard because their natural giftings aligned with the outcomes they wanted, so they never pushed beyond some of those outcomes. In reality, they could have taken those natural giftings and gone significantly further if they had enough self-awareness to go, oh no, I need to apply work ethic along with this natural gifting, and then that's accelerant on flames.
Did you fail?
All the time. Yeah, I failed. I failed professionally. I can think of specific examples where I've made mistakes and failed and learned from those. I failed academically, right? I delivered that 2.98. There's a lot more to that story. I started out with a 4.0. And so, to take a 4.0 down that low over time almost was harder than bringing it up. And so the difference, and I think this is a key to emotional intelligence also, is having a learner's posture. But it took failure for me to learn that I needed to have a learner's posture.
How did you keep your moral compass calibrated when you're constantly having to live in these lies and you're dealing with other people who you might not align with morally, ethically, but you have to work with them so that you can extract information?
Sure. Two very specific things: faith and my wife. My wife, Susan, had incredibly high expectations for what a man was. And they were rooted directly in kind of watching her own dad be a husband and a father, in her family. And so she had similar expectations for me. And she was good at communicating those expectations to me. She was good at calling me on my BS, but doing so in ways that showed that she wanted me to be better or provided a path towards being better. So it was an honest and caring level of accountability in there that made me want to be better. So the combination of faith, which we both strongly held, and that was a foundation for our marriage, and then her holding me accountable to a man that she knew I could be, even if I didn't know what that looked like yet. Because I was, we were 23 and 24 years old when we got married, right? My frontal lobe was a decade away from being fully developed.
Yeah, I'd argue mine is still a decade away.
Right.
You say held when you talk to Faith in the past tense. You held Faith. You still do.
But yeah, absolutely, still do. In fact, most of the viewers won't know this, but my wife recently passed away, and I don't think I could have gotten through that were it not for the faith, a deeply held Christian faith that she and I held throughout our marriage, and I continued to hold today.
That was something that is interesting to me, and I didn't know if it was something. It's not in my notes. It wasn't something I was going to be bringing up in here, but since you did bring it up, your wife had early onset Alzheimer's. Is that correct?
She did. She had early onset Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed in 2020 and then passed in February of 25. So 5-year journey.
That's pretty fast.
It was very fast. It was, I think they say the average for early onset is between 3 and 7 years, from diagnosis to passing. So right kind of in the middle of that range. She was 58 years old, so quite young. And for the viewers that don't know this, early onset is really just kind of an arbitrary definition of that's time bounded at the age of 65. So any Alzheimer's diagnosis that comes after 65 is considered Alzheimer's, and anything that's diagnosed prior to 65 is called early onset.
Now, she was pretty brilliant, actually. She worked on the Bin Laden case too, didn't she?
She did. She was on the very first Bin Laden team in the mid 90s, very early on in the hunt for Bin Laden. And she did that for a few years and was quite good at what she did. It was a different role in the operations directorate than I had. I kind of describe it more as putting puzzle pieces together. But she, the role now would largely be what would be considered a targeter. Somebody who goes after specific targets and gathers all the information and learns them and helps, kind of identify ways to pursue that target.
So what advice would you have for somebody else who finds himself in a similar situation where they've got a spouse or loved one who's going through something similar? What have you learned that you think would be useful to pass on?
That's a great question. And I need to spend some time thinking about that. But I had the real benefit of talking to my son and then girlfriend about this at the front end of this. And in the process, girlfriend became fiance and then fiance became wife. And what I talked to them about was the idea that in marriage, it's easy for everybody when it's easy, right? Love is great. The early days with, everybody is excited to be with one another and, it's all, rose-colored glasses and rainbows and puppies and, ice cream. And it's easy for everybody, every relationship when it's easy. The difference is what happens when it's hard. And in every relationship, it will get hard too. There's no question about that. So I want to know when, I'll transition a little bit into the business world. When I'm hiring people, one of the main questions I ask them about is a series of questions that dives into how they handle things when it's really hard. And because, character matters in these situations, whether dealing with a significant illness with a spouse or the risk of losing a child or, failure at work. And character really shows itself when under pressure. It doesn't really show itself when things are going well. And so to get through a significant illness or issue like, Susan's, I think really was a character test, right? Could I honor the promises I've made to her, when we were 23 and 24, and it was easy to make those promises, right? Till death do us part, in sickness and in health. And I've seen people I know choose not to honor that and walk away from that. And so when talking to, my family and my kids and others, I've said it's easy for everybody when it's easy, but what matters is what they do when it's hard, where they go to. And so my kids got a real gift, right? My son got to see how his future wife was showing up for him in this tremendously difficult time. She got to see how this family that she wanted to join was rallying or breaking apart, as the case might be, and we rallied. So she got a sense of what we're going to do, or where do we go to when times are hard, what drives us and keeps us together. And I said to them, as hard as this situation is, it's actually an incredible gift for you two as you're looking at the decision of picking your life partner, because there will be times when it is incredibly hard, when that character is tested, right? And most bottles don't show a crack until you pressurize it, right? But when you put pressure on that bottle, then it starts to leak or breaks. And so you don't get to test your relationship sometimes in a meaningful way before you get to this point. So it's thinking through the character issue. And then I would add to it, the main thing is you choose, right? I fundamentally believe that a marriage or a relationship like that is built on the choice to love somebody every day. That love really isn't an emotion, because if you think of love solely as an emotion, then emotions ebb and flow. They wax and wane, right?
Yeah.
And an emotion is never going to be enough to carry you through a valley, right? That emotion you feel on a mountaintop experience often isn't going to be enough to carry you through that really, really long valley. And so, but what can is the choice to say, I'm in a valley, but I know valleys have exits, and I know valleys have, hills that come out of them. So I'm going to choose to continue to press on through this valley till I get to that hill. And I believe that feelings follow actions, so that choice to love this person, even when the emotion isn't there, will carry you through those challenges.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. And I think that's something that can help people who are in a situation themselves, realizing that the choice is theirs. It's that old Viktor Frankl quote. The one thing you can't take from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of life's great freedoms is one's ability to choose their own attitude in any given circumstance. Right. But it all comes down to you. Then that choice that you make, and that's your power. That's the last thing that you have.
That's exactly right. Yeah. How you approach it, your attitude, and the choice you make to respond to the circumstances, good or bad, those are the two things you can own. Right? So.
Yeah. I remember, and my wife, when she was in labor for 27 some odd hours, and what wasn't going the way it should be going. And she's in a lot of pain. And I kept saying, hey, look at this is one day out of your life. How do you want to look back and be remembered for this? Do you want to look back? Because she had this whole idea on her birthing plan and what she wanted to do. And then things were getting difficult and she wanted to change her mind. And I said, you do what you want to do, but it's your choice. And how do you want to look back and be remembered? And think of your grandma. How would she deal with these things? And you hold her in high regard. And it's those little choices, that little bit extra that we put in every day that seems to separate the ordinary from the extraordinary. And yeah, I like how you put that.
Well, and I don't want anybody to get the misimpression that it was easy, right? Making that choice is not easy.
No.
But it was the only choice in my mind. And having the attitude isn't easy, right? And I failed a lot. Like, there were times when my temper got the best of me, or my frustration, and I didn't respond the way I should have responded, in the midst of a hard situation as her illness was progressing. But there was a new day the next day. I could sit down with her and apologize for what I'd said or how frustrated I'd gotten, and start all over. So that that radical transparency and accountability with her never went away. Right. And I still trusted her with my failure, that it wasn't going to change how she viewed me. Right. She never saw me as less human because I failed in the midst of this hard thing, because I owned it. And then the next day worked on being better about whatever it was, that had caused that failure, and to choose to continue to love her and honor the promises that we'd made to each other.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It wasn't easy.
No. And I think a lot of times people look at it and they say, oh man, okay, well, I failed. I fell. And then they look at themselves as the person who fell or as the failure. And it's never too late to stop, regroup, and choose a more desirable course of action. Doesn't matter. And I would tell that to my kids all the time. Like, I was raised, in for a penny, in for a pound. Okay, we come this far. I guess we're in it. Here we go. No. If all of a sudden the anger subsides, if all of a sudden the situation in your head or whatever changes, it's never too late to stop, regroup, and choose a more desirable course of action. And I think there's power in that, knowing that falling doesn't mean that you're a faller, doesn't mean that you're a failure.
Yeah, but I do think there are people that define themselves by the failure as opposed to defining themselves by the learning that came from the failure. And some of my friends may disagree with me on this, but I think I have a gift of forgetting the failures.
That's good.
Once I've learned from them.
That's a healthy thing to have.
So I try not to let it weigh me down, and try to, what's the lesson I can learn from it? How quickly can I move on and go through this? But I mean, learning it in a real sense. Like, it can't be, just a shallow learning. It's got to be real. But then once I've learned from it, it's not as if it never happened, but it doesn't have any ownership of my brain anymore. Right? It doesn't weigh me down. It's not baggage I'm carrying in my pack. It's gone because it served its purpose. And I will have people remind me of some of the situations, and I'll legitimately have forgotten about it because I've moved on. Yet I have friends who, that's a really challenging aspect of life for them, is the ability to move on from that and not let it weigh them down as a definition of who they are.
Well, why do you think you've got the ability to move on from that and not define yourself where other people might have that challenge?
I'd love to say it's something that I did intentionally, but I don't know that I know why.
Okay.
Right. And I probably think I'm better at it than I am. So I'll throw that out there, that, open to others that know me well, correcting me on it. But I've just found it very, very helpful, because I think I know myself pretty well. Right? I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out, I live in a world of the way I assess things as a good, better, best model. Right. And so my kids will tell you that I'm not always great at recognizing success or achievement, because I want to look at what can be done better with something.
Yes.
And I've had to be very, very intentional at coming back to going, no, that where you are is great. This is awesome. And then waiting some time before going, okay, now how do we do a critical, AAR on this and figure out what we didn't do well and how we can improve on it? Because if you're not wired that way, it can be a very disheartening approach to have somebody automatically just come in and rip it apart looking for how you can make it better. Right. And so I've had to tone that down in working with others in a way that I wouldn't try and tone it down on myself, because they're not me. They react differently to feedback. And some folks need that more positive feedback before they can hear any critical feedback. But my model is to go, okay, good is good, but better is better, and best is best. So how do we move anything we're trying to do from good to better to best? That's not to say everything has to go through that, but to be intentional about some of that when it matters.
Well, that mindset can lead to not celebrating your wins, to always looking at the next thing on the horizon. I know for myself, it's something that I work really hard on, is to stop and celebrate, recognize what a win is, and try and celebrate that win. Make an event out of it, have a meal, do something with the family, because otherwise you're just constantly on that treadmill striving, and there's always that false peak and the next peak.
I'm not great at that.
No, I'm not either. And it's something
I know
I'm working
that's
on.
a weakness of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but it can also lead to burnout. It can lead to exhaustion. Is that
Yep.
something that you've had to deal with?
I think it is. I think I'm fairly driven most of the time anyway. But absolutely, it can lead to burnout. Um, I'm fortunate that I've got some men that I've worked with over the years that I surround myself with that kind of help point out some of those signs to me and force me to step back and that hold me accountable on some of these things. And I'm grateful to them for that.
Mm. Yeah, it's good to have a strong friend group or
Yes.
support group that you could be honest with, who know where you're at, and not many people
But
have that.
we use that at the analogy of iron sharpening iron, right?
Sure.
And so I do approach that with them, in that sense. But one of the interesting aspects that I think people forget about any of these analogies, whether it's pruning or iron sharpening iron or pressure testing or whatever, when you sharpen a saw blade, you're removing metal. You're
Yeah.
generating heat. Sparks fly. So the idea of iron sharpening iron is actually a pretty abrasive process sometimes that requires deep trust between the two parties because metal is removed from both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody comes out of it unchanged on either side.
Correct.
And so I think people forget that sometimes that those concepts of allowing yourself to be held accountable by people that you trust, they can be unpleasant or difficult processes to get through, but they serve a really robust purpose, which is that now I've got a sharp saw that I can go use that saw for what it needs to be used for. Or, I love the pruning analogy, right? I grow apples and peaches and blueberries. And I always have this choice to make of, do I want big trees or big blueberry bushes, or do I want big apples and big blueberries?
Mm.
Because you can't get both.
No, all the energy is going to be put into one or the other. Are they growing the
Correct.
tree or growing the apple?
Correct. And when you prune a tree, you're taking a quarter to a third of the growth out of that tree. That's a lot of removal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so likewise, we've got to do the same to ourselves, right? But it's cutting off part of your life can be an incredibly painful thing, even if it does serve a bigger purpose. And so figuring out how to do that, when you need to do that, and why you're doing it is really important. But if you don't do it, like you have to do it, otherwise you're going to be this mess of a man who doesn't really know what he wants to do or be.
Did you find that you had to go through periods of pruning things or people out of your life?
Yes, absolutely. Pruning, it's pruning behaviors, pruning people, pruning desires, pruning comparisons. I mean,
Mm.
all of those things, right? Being intentional. And I think you can't do it without another set of eyes there. Like, the apple tree can't prune itself. The farmer has to prune it, right? So I think, sometimes, and the farmer is looking at it, steps back, looks at it from a distance, then comes up and prunes it up close. And so I think sometimes for me, it's helped to have others along in that process to make sure I'm seeing, the tree shape, meaning me, the way I really want to achieve it and talk through that. And a lot of that was with Susan, right? Her helping prune me, but some of it's been, my friend group and peers that I've invited into that aspect of my life.
Aside from the work you've done with CIA, you've also worked in Hollywood, and you've helped advise on films and shows. What are some of the things that you find Hollywood typically gets wrong about the agency?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind that Hollywood always gets wrong is the amount of gunplay that takes place in the intelligence world, right? Like, there is rarely a spy show or spy movie that doesn't involve somebody getting killed every episode,
Sure.
right? And and usually by an intelligence officer who's shooting a bad guy or shooting somebody in self-defense or being shot or whatever. And obviously that just isn't the case, right? In fact, most intelligence officers who are focused on collection, this is different than officers focused on covert action, and we can talk about that difference if you want to. But most officers are going out to recruit spies and collect intelligence. If they were to draw their weapon or use their weapon, generally would view that as having been a failure.
Sure.
Right? Because you something failed in your security process that, required you to use a weapon in some way or form or fashion. And you would likely be pulled out of that country and, shipped off wherever you back to headquarters. And in fact, many case officers will go their whole lives without ever carrying a weapon, their whole careers without carrying a weapon. It's generally reserved for officers that are operating in very high threat environments. I would say the second thing that Hollywood probably gets wrong is the level that they portray conspiracy theories with rogue elements in the government going off and either undermining policy or implementing policy or overthrowing governments or manipulating things for personal economic benefit. I think they obviously it helps them tell the stories they want to tell, but I think it does make people believe that everybody in the CIA is a cowboy that's really wants to undermine the American way of life.
Yeah, that does get portrayed a lot. And, I'm guilty of it. I asked you my conspiracy theories when we're out in the hunt there, and I got the real scoop on 9/11, so I'll just keep that under my hat. So we're good. At least we all know now. Okay.
Yes. I mean, as I've said to you before, one of my favorite comments in response to questions about conspiracy theories is, the only way two people can keep a secret is when one of them is dead.
That's right.
Right. And so at the end of the day, I apply a simple test to any sort of conspiracy theory, which is that how likely is it that this could have stayed secret for as many years or as many decades as it's been since the thing supposedly happened? And I find it really, really incredibly difficult when some of the very real conspiracies that folks like CIA engaged in, efforts to assassinate Castro in Cuba, et cetera,
Sure.
that many of those were uncovered within 5 or 6 years after those things happened, and they were sanctioned by the president and all of that sort of stuff. Overthrows of various governments, like most of those things have become public fairly rapidly after they actually happened. So, to think of something like, the conspiracy surrounding Kennedy's assassination or whatever, and to be, 6 decades on from that, time frame, and think that there's still, some serious, conspiracy that was maintained, I find it very difficult at the end of the day to believe that that's the thing that really people have been successful at keeping it quiet when so many others failed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, actually, I did a Kennedy assassination episode. It never went to air. I had a fellow who'd written books and lectured on the Kennedy assassination, and I had another guy because he had this whole theory on the ballistics, and
Sure.
So I brought in another guy who's a ballistician, and we sat down to talk about it. And my buddy who's a ballistician was coming in late, and I'm like texting him, like, you better get in here soon. The guy's already on to his third tall boy, and it's like 10 o'clock in the morning right now. And so it was an interesting episode. I might have to dig it up from the archives one day, but it's never seen the light of day.
There are conspiratorial people, right? Meaning there were people involved in the government at that point in time who were naturally bent towards engaging in underhanded things, right? They engaged in conspiratorial actions. They definitely believed that they knew better, or that Kennedy was bad, or that Castro was bad, or whatever. But at the end of the day, and then there were people that make mistakes.
Sure.
Right. That screwed up in the investigation or screwed up in the security. Yeah. And people have a strong narrative of self-preservation. And so absolutely people will lie about things that happened or things that didn't happen in order to preserve their own reputation, their job, et cetera. And so, unpicking all of that, I think absolutely feeds conspiracy theories writ large as well. But I really think that if you apply that test of how easy is it for the government to keep a real secret, for 6 decades, it's really, really challenging on something as big, powerful, and involved as something like a Kennedy assassination or a moon landing or collapse of the World Trade Center would be.
Yeah, and of course that's what you would say, having worked for the agency, but fair enough.
Exactly.
I think we've touched on a number of the things that we've got that I wanted to talk about. So you're a part of the Explorers Club, which is a pretty cool thing. That was something we chatted about, as well as, what was the other one? The Defenders Club? Is that what it is? DefenderX.
So DefenderX is a group of explorers that take Land Rovers, amphibious Land Rovers, and take them out on expeditions around the world. It's led by 2 gentlemen, Jeff Wilner, who lives in Toronto, and Steve Brooks, who lives in England. And we have 2 Land Rovers that go out on these expeditions that have the ability to transition from on land to amphibious vehicles with the benefit of pontoons and a direct drive attached to the engine. The most recent expedition that they did was they traveled the length of the Yukon River from all the way down to the ocean, 700 miles.
Holy crow!
By river in these 2 Land Rovers. And we are just gearing up for next year's expeditions, which will, without giving away where we're going, will take place on the other side of the world from North America. And we'll leave it at that, but it'll be a multi-year series of pieced together expeditions that nobody's ever done before, including some very long travel over open water.
Interesting. And you're going to be doing that?
Yes. Yeah. I'm part of the team that's doing that. We'll have a number of folks that kind of go in and out of the expedition over time, because we'll tend to do it in kind of 2 to 4 week chunks of time. And as we go and continue to improve on the technologies that we use to drive these on amphibious mode, we'll take longer and longer passages that we do, which will be very interesting. We've sailed them up the Seine River. We sailed them up the Thames River. Took them out in the English Channel, and then spent 700 miles on the Yukon River. So it's time now to take them out in places where you can't see the shore.
That's crazy. Do you film these adventures?
We do film them. Working to put together a series of short kind of documentary style films. There's a pretty active Instagram account called DefenderX that folks can go to and check it out. And it's a throwback to kind of some of the old explorer mindsets of there is no purpose for this other than to just go do it.
Oh, I love it.
To do it because it hadn't been done, to do it because it's fun and unique and involves some risk, and to do it because at some levels it's good to sometimes be able to do nonsense.
So do you have to have a defender in order to be involved with this, or can you be involved in another capacity?
No, many of the team don't have defenders, right? We have 2 defenders for the team, right? But many of the other folks that are involved are explorers in their own right that are engaged in other types of exploration activity, but are not necessarily defender fans. And the root of the defender component of this was the founder of DefenderX, Jeff Wilner, having grown up in Africa and spent his formative years there, driving defenders, and then he's ultimately in the early 2000s he drove around the world in a defender that took him a couple of years to do, but he was successful at doing that. So it was an outgrowth of that.
Well, I'm going to have to keep an eye on that one, and maybe we'll talk off air if there's any spots or volunteers on that crew that you guys are looking for, because that sounds like a hell of a lot of fun.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it's a great group of people.
Yeah. I've got A couple buddies have Defenders. So Nick Bitchenik, and he's past podcast guest, and he's in California. One of his Defenders was used in an Apple commercial. I think I sent that over to you. And then
Yep.
Florian Wagner, he's a photographer for National Geographic and Playboy, and he's got a Gucci Defender that he has put together. I'm going to chat with them, see what they know about all of this too, and I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and these are not stock Defenders, right?
No,
But they're
showed me a
heavily
picture.
modified. But it's very cool. Some of the rest of the team are really incredible. Science-minded individuals. And Steve Brooks from the UK is a tremendous explorer in his own right. He flew a Spitfire around the world. On his own. He has flown a helicopter from the North Pole to the South Pole, including having to ditch it in the what's the name of the strait down there off the tip of South America?
Oh, you got me.
It's going to kill me. But anyway, he ditched it off the coast of Antarctica in 0-degree water temps with 0-degree air temps, and floated in a lifeboat for 18 hours till he was rescued. And then ultimately went back and redid the trip and finished it in a helicopter. So, some pretty impressive folks that have been doing stuff like this for a long time. So it's a good group.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should be talking about?
There was probably more on emotional intelligence or leadership.
I'm here. I'm happy to.
Like I had this discussion with some of the folks in the expedition team about how do you hire people, right, and how do you train them up, and so we talked about the idea of hiring for capacity versus capability, right? Because one of the leadership development tools, or one of the leadership development qualities I look for in somebody is I'll take a high capacity individual over a high capability individual every day. And
100%.
because I think you can teach the capabilities to where you need them to be, but it's very difficult to grow somebody's capacity beyond its natural, extent. And somebody who comes in as a low or medium capacity individual, but is high capability and doesn't recognize that, can oftentimes have a very bad attitude when they run into ceilings on their growth and development. So I look for high capacity individuals with the right attitude, right self-awareness, and because then I can make sure that they can, as a team member, build the capabilities they need to execute in that team environment.
When I was younger, starting in business, I'd hire a person, I'd look at their CV. I had no idea what I was doing, right? I look at their CV and it's 10 pages long and they've got all of these great accolades. I'm like, fantastic. This person's going to be amazing. They've got everything I need. And they come on and they were wah-wah, right? Maybe not doing the greatest. And a mentor at one point said, you're hiring these people on. Can you do the skill set that they're doing? Yeah, I can do the skill set that I'm hiring for. Okay. So you could teach a person that skill set. Like, yeah. So, but you can't teach them the core values that their mother should have taught them.
Correct.
That's a good point. He says, so why don't you hire the people who have the strong core values that align with your own? And if they have the teachable points already, great. And if they don't, fair enough. You can teach that to them. And I've carried that one forward. It's, I don't know if I was in a large growth operation, maybe that wouldn't still apply, but maybe I'd want to have people that have both the core values as well as the teachable points. But it changed how I hire and how I operate. Yeah,
and I would say I would use character in place of core values. I think largely they're interchangeable but the alignment with yours being the key component, right? And so, I think if their character is good and aligned with your character, then their core values are going to be good and aligned with you as well. Getting at that in an interview process can be challenging sometimes, because again, character or adherence to core values typically only shows when tested. Right. So I ask two primary questions at my interviews to get into that with them.
Okay.
I asked people to tell me what's the hardest thing they've ever done.
Okay.
And I explain it can be an academic challenge, a professional challenge, a personal challenge, athletic, whatever. What is the thing that pops in your mind immediately is the most challenging thing that you've ever done? What did it take in you to do it? And then how do you apply what you learned from doing that today? Right.
Okay.
And then I just listen to the answer and kind of poke into that question or their answer and see where we go on that. I get answers across the board. Some are very simple answers and some are very robust answers, and you learn a lot about the person in that. And in fact, you learn that some people have never really had to do anything very hard.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are like that.
And so it's very core values can be loosely held when never tested. So I really want to understand where they've tested these things. What have they done that's truly been hard that has tested them? And then the second key question, and my HR people hate this question, but the question I ask is, tell me about an ethical failure you've had. And walk me through what happened. And more importantly, walk me through what you learned from the process.
What kind of responses would you get to something like that?
Well, I've had quite a few people say I've never had one of those, which is patently untrue.
Sure.
I can think of, I'm not even sure Mother Teresa would have answered that question as I've never had one of those. In fact, I'm certain she wouldn't, right? Everybody is at least told a lie, right? Which you would argue is an ethical failure, right?
Sure.
But I've had answers all the way up to I cheated on my spouse and this is what happened. Now, I care way less about what the failure was, right? And so I have to be really careful as I guide them through this because I really care about what the learning was that came from that. I care about the weakness that led to it and then the learning that came from it and understanding, did it make them stronger or did it make them weaker, right? Did that, when you think about what we call them Pyrex dishes in the States. I don't know.
Yeah, we got them. Yeah, those heat proof.
Yeah. So that has been tested with heat and pressure applied to it, right? And if it didn't make it through that process, it busted and got tossed out. But now because it made it through that process, you can put boiling liquids in it and the glass isn't going to crack because they've tested to ensure that it withstands that pressure and that heat. So I'm looking for the human equivalence of this. What's tested them, and what made them stronger or weaker as a result of that. And then the third part of the process for me is when I call references. Very few people give a bad reference.
Sure.
Right. You don't tell somebody call this person because they don't like me. You tell them you're expecting to hear only good things. So that's kind of a wasted phone call. Right. So the questions I ask of the reference are, what does this person need to do better? How does this person handle stress? Right. How does this person handle communication and balance? Right. I ask questions that are designed to get at critical feedback, not negative, right, but critical feedback, so I can better assess again how they're going to handle these sorts of things. When they get in, somebody tells me they're the best spreadsheet builder in the world, that doesn't tell me anything, but tell me how their spreadsheet helped their team succeed when nobody else understood it. Were they able to teach somebody else how to build the spreadsheet so that they shared that knowledge? So digging into these things more than just calling to get a positive feedback reference from, a past employer.
And do you find that these the people you call will tend to start spilling the goods?
I think U.S. culture is so concerned with being sued. It's so heavily litigious that sometimes people they'll literally answer only the question of, I would hire this person again.
Right.
Right. And so I don't fault them if they're not willing to, but I do appreciate it because at the end of the day, for anybody that's on my team, I actually want the best future for them. I don't care about the best now. I want the best future for them. And in order to get to the best future for them, I have to know who they are, and I have to know they know who they are. And then we can work together to get to that best future.
Yeah. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are being employed don't realize that a lot of employers actually want. They want the best future for you. And that doesn't necessarily mean the best future at my company. It could be just the best future for you. Because if you're happy when you're with me, and then you're happy when you leave, then I got no headaches, and you're going to refer other people over. And I really doubled down on that mentality, wanting the best future for the person. And what that also led me do was not just try and get good at hiring, but also get good at firing. And if the person comes on, because it's like a dating process, you're putting your best foot forward as a company, the individual's putting their best foot forward as an employee, and if they're feeling each other out and seeing like, are we going to be able to work together? What's going on? And you can make mistakes, and people, there's two things I do. Number one, when I'm done with my interview with somebody, I tell them, I'm not going to follow up with you. I mean, this is like a dating process. Some people get so lost in the selling process that they just want to sell, and win that little thing. If after we've laid everything out here, if this is still for you, you follow up with me, and then we'll proceed from there. If it's not, fair enough, right? And then I'm not wasting my time. And the other thing I've done is get good at firing, which means calling it quick and finding a way to transition a person into something that more suits their personality type or their skill set. I might have friends who own businesses and to get you over there, but it doesn't mean done, you're gone, and we're just severing all ties. There's a very human part of that. And I think you've hit it on the head, which is caring about the person and their future in general.
Right. I mean, it's easy to say hire slow, fire fast.
Sure.
And there's truth in that. There's validity in that. But that it has to be tempered with the understanding of the humanity component of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Collins talks about having the right people on the bus. Like, do I have the right people on my bus where I'm trying to go?
And get the wrong people off.
Right. But you do need to get people off the bus if they're the wrong people on the bus. But also you need to make sure that those that are on the bus are in the right seats.
Mm-hmm. That's what, right? Better to best, right?
Yes. Good to best.
Good to best. There you go.
And good to best. And so, the requirement on that, I actually think is more burdensome on the employer than it is the employee.
Yes.
And it requires active management of your talent, right? And active assessment of them and active communication and transparency with them. Right? Which I think is very hard for a lot of us to do sometimes because we're caught up in executing on the business and we just want people to get it. We just want them to kind of get in and do the job and look for their own growth opportunities. And people don't work that way. Right. And so your job as a leader in a business is really, it's a people problem set. And so that's actually one of the things I think I took most from the agency was how to deal with people problem sets, right? How to understand motivations, understand problems, and to communicate with them and to work towards, that communication leading towards solutions. And so, you got to make these assessments and communicate with the employees. Are they in the right seat on the bus or do they need to be on a different bus? Right. And that's not to say there's fault in that, right? It's just this bus is going this way. The bus you need to be on is going that way.
Right.
Right. And the difference may be a character issue or a core value alignment issue. It may be a skill set issue. It may be a capacity issue. And just because you've been on the bus for the first half of the journey and needed to be on the bus for the first half of the journey doesn't mean that seat is yours for the rest of the journey. I
100% agree.
Because your needs change, the business's needs change, your growth capability and capacity changes, et cetera.
I look at, if we're to use that dating analogy, I find that employee-employer relationships are often quite like that. Sometimes when it comes time for a relationship to end, either party has to make an enemy out of each other in order to make that next step to move forward. A couple of people dating each other, they don't necessarily have to be bad people. They're just not they're just incompatible in that current role. And the same with employee-employer. I don't hate people who work for me who aren't doing a good job. And I truly do want the best for them. I just don't want them on my bus. And it just being able to separate that emotion part and be able to make the decisions based on a pragmatic skill set as opposed to the emotional, okay, well, if I'm going to leave, it's got to be because I'm perfect and they're terrible. And how do we do that? And I think I try to anyways articulate that to anybody working with me at the early stages, and it seems to work. All of a sudden, I've got the right people on the bus, and they're staying on the bus.
Right.
And I don't know how much I really changed other than just that open communication with people about how I operate.
Yeah. Good communication of expectations, measurements along the way, and communication about how you're doing towards those measurements, right, is really, really key, whether good or bad. Like the same level of communication with people that are failing is as important as with people who are succeeding. And, if an employee is surprised that they're being let go, that they're being moved off the bus, that's really a failure of the leader more than it's a failure of the employee.
Yeah.
And so I look at that and go, no, nobody should be surprised at that. Both parties should sit there and go, yeah, we both recognize this is not working. And, we might disagree on some of the whys, but we come to agreement largely on it's not working and probably not fixable, right? And therefore, it makes more sense to part than it does. There's a great book called Necessary Endings, which is helpful to folks that are trying to figure out how to do this and work through this process, because those endings are necessary. But in those moments, I'm looking for some of the same things I'm looking for. If I'm assessing an employee and whether to put them on a PIP, a performance improvement plan, I'm looking at, do they have ownership of where they are? Do they agree with where we're trying to go? And do we agree on that they have the capability to get there? Because if those things aren't true, then we're wasting time with the PIP. You're giving them false hope if you can't reach agreement on those things.
Yeah, that's smart. And a lot of people just have a difficult time with that social interaction of making that pragmatic call.
It's very hard to do well. It's hard in us to do it well, right? We want to live in the world of things are good. It is hard to live in the world of you need to be better.
I like it. Is there anything else that we should be chatting about?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well,
we covered a lot.
Yeah, we sure did. I think I got a lot of the points that I was looking for. Yeah, you've got a hell of a background, and you're definitely you got some cool adventures coming down the pipe, which I'm really excited to be following. If people want to follow you on social media, they can find you. That's I'm going to put links in the bio. Any other links I should be sharing with them?
No, I think that the Instagram and Twitter links are good to throw in there. If folks have questions about emotional intelligence, or they have questions about the agency, or they have other questions about that, I'm obviously happy to answer them. If they want to spend some time going to read this stuff at Field Ethos, I'd love to have folks read more of that. I've loved writing for them because it gives me a chance to dig into most of those stories are about failure, right? Or about the hard things in life. And so my hope is that in some of those lessons, people will learn a little bit, they'll laugh a little bit, and maybe get more comfortable at self-reflection themselves and look for opportunities to learn. Because there's plenty of hunting and fishing magazines that show the hero shots and the big 6x6 bull on the ground that don't ever talk about that. Well, for example, our hunt, we had 3 guys that hunted hard for a week, and we came home empty-handed, but we didn't come home with empty hearts.
No,
right?
No, I had a hell of a great time.
And we learned a lot. We built new relationships. We got to experience beautiful country. And, those stories don't necessarily get written a lot, but they're actually the heart of what it is we're trying to do when we're out there. It really is rarely about that 6x6 that's on the wall.
100%. 100%. It's icing on the cake when you get the animal. but it's the journey of going there. It's the people you spend the time with. It's the difficult moments that are inevitably going to come that you look back on. And that's what they call type 2 fun. It's
right.
Type 1, it's like a roller coaster, a lot of fun, but you don't look back and remember it. Type 2, it's like you're slogging with the elk on your back for days on end, but it's raining and it's cold, but you look back and it's a great time. And then a buddy of mine, he says, oh, what about type 3 fun? I'm like, I've never heard of type 3 fun. He says, yeah, that's when it really sucks when you're doing it. And then you look back and it still sucks. I'm like, okay, right. Yeah, I've had those too.
We've all had those as well. Yep.
I love it. Okay, well, Doug, thank you very much for being on the Silvercore podcast. I really enjoyed this time, and I know we're going to have to do this again because there's other tangents I'd love my ADHD brain to go down and explore with you.
Thank you, brother. It was a lot of fun to do it with you, and as always, appreciate what you're doing.